Debunking the narrative. Why Dakota Johnson's story isn't Jamie's blame. The birth of a convenient story. In the modern celebrity ecosystem, stories rarely emerge organically. They are assembled, piece by piece, from interviews stripped of context, photographs frozen in ambiguous moments, and narratives shaped by repetition rather than truth. Once a story gains traction, it hardens into something resembling fact, even when it rests on little more than speculation. One such narrative emerged during the height of the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, that Dakota Johnson appeared isolated, emotionally strained, or uncomfortable during the franchise's meteoric rise, and that Jamie Dornan, her co-star, was somehow implicated in that experience. It was a convenient story. It had tension, contrast, and emotional appeal. Two actors bound by an intense on-screen relationship, one seemingly withdrawn, the other perceived as distant. The internet did the rest. But convenience is not accuracy, and repetition is not truth. This essay seeks to dismantle that narrative, not to defend a celebrity out of loyalty, but to interrogate how public perception so often distorts personal reality. By examining public statements, documented interactions, industry pressures, and the psychological dynamics of fame, we can begin to understand why Dakota Johnson's emotional journey during that period cannot reasonably be attributed to Jamie Dornan, and why doing so oversimplifies a far more complex human experience. Fame as a pressure cooker, not a partnership failure. To understand Dakota Johnson's public demeanor during the 50 Shades era, one must first understand the environment into which she was thrust. The franchise was not merely successful, it was culturally explosive. Overnight, Dakota Johnson became a global focal point for discussions about sexuality, feminism, agency, and artistic integrity. Every interview she gave was parsed. Every facial expression was analyzed. Every pause was interpreted. This level of scrutiny does not merely amplify pressure, it distorts self-presentation. Introversion can look like sadness. Thoughtfulness can look like detachment. Discomfort with invasive questions can be reframed as emotional fragility. Crucially, none of this requires a co-star to be at fault. Dakota Johnson herself has repeatedly spoken about feeling overwhelmed by the machine of publicity, by the lack of creative control, and by the experience of being spoken about rather than to. These reflections are not indictments of the people around her. They are critiques of an industry that often consumes young actors without equipping them to survive the aftermath. To blame Jamie Dornan for this environment is to misunderstand how little control individual actors often have over the machinery of global fame. 3. The misreading of distance. One of the most frequently cited evidence points in the narrative is the perceived emotional distance between Johnson and Dornan during press tours. Interviews where their energy levels differed. Moments where one appeared guarded while the other appeared relaxed. But distance does not equal harm, and difference does not equal conflict. Jamie Dornan has long been described by colleagues as private, reserved, and uncomfortable with excessive exposure. Dakota Johnson, while witty and candid, has also spoken openly about anxiety and the toll of relentless public attention. Two people can share a professional respect and still process pressure in fundamentally different ways. The assumption that one person's discomfort must be caused by the other reveals more about audience expectations than about the individuals involved. We are conditioned to expect co-stars to perform emotional harmony in public, even when the circumstances are unnatural and exhausting. In reality, professionalism does not require emotional synchronization. It requires boundaries. The danger of assigning emotional responsibility. At the heart of the narrative implicating Jamie Dornan lies a subtle but troubling assumption that one adult is responsible for another adult's emotional well-being in a professional context. This assumption disproportionately affects men in narratives involving female distress. The story becomes one of failure to protect, failure to support, failure to connect. But Dakota Johnson has never stated that Jamie Dornan harmed her emotionally, isolated her, or contributed to her distress. To suggest otherwise is to speak over her, replacing her own words with speculation. Emotional difficulty does not require a villain. Sometimes it requires only an overwhelming situation. By insisting on assigning blame, the public simplifies a reality that is far more nuanced, and far less dramatic. Versus Jamie Dornan's position, the limits of influence. Jamie Dornan entered the 50 Shades franchise already married, already a father, already deeply anchored in a life outside Hollywood. This context matters. He was not building an identity through the franchise. He was navigating it as a professional obligation, one that brought opportunity, but also discomfort. Dornan has spoken candidly about his unease with the sexualization of the role, with the media frenzy, and with the erosion of privacy that followed. This does not make him detached. It makes him grounded elsewhere. Expecting him to serve as an emotional stabilizer for a co-star while managing his own boundaries, family life, and internal conflict is an unrealistic projection. It also ignores the reality that actors are colleagues, not caretakers. Public silence is not private guilt. Another pillar of the narrative is silence. Jamie Dornan did not publicly address rumors. He did not offer explanations. He did not counter speculation with dramatic statements. In the celebrity world, silence is often interpreted as admission. But in real life, silence is often self-preservation. Dornan's refusal to engage with gossip aligns with a broader pattern in his life: protecting his family, minimizing exposure, and declining to participate in narratives that require him to sacrifice privacy for approval. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance. It is a boundary. Amelia Warner, the invisible constant. While public attention fixated on imagined tensions between co-stars, one relationship remained remarkably stable: Jamie Dornan's marriage to Amelia Warner. Warner did not insert herself into the narrative. She did not compete for visibility. She did not respond to speculation. Instead, she continued to live a life defined by creativity, family, and deliberate distance from Hollywood spectacle. The endurance of their bond is not incidental. It is evidence of a shared value system that prioritizes reality over performance. If Jamie Dornan were emotionally negligent, detached, or incapable of supporting those around him, it would likely manifest first in his most intimate relationship. Instead, his marriage has been characterized by longevity, mutual respect, and intentional privacy, qualities rarely sustained by individuals lacking emotional accountability. 8. The myth of on-screen transference. Another misconception fueling the narrative is the belief that intense on-screen relationships must translate into intense off-screen bonds. When they do not, disappointment follows, and blame is assigned. But acting is not emotional surrender. It is craft. Dornan and Johnson portrayed a relationship marked by control, vulnerability, and conflict. Expecting them to replicate emotional intimacy off-screen ignores the psychological discipline required to leave a role behind. In many cases, emotional distance after intense roles is not a sign of dysfunction. It is a sign of health. Dakota Johnson's agency and voice. Perhaps the most problematic aspect of the narrative is how it undermines Dakota Johnson's agency. She is not a passive figure acted upon by others. She is an articulate, self-aware individual who has consistently framed her experience as one shaped by industry forces, creative constraints, and personal boundaries. To reframe her story as one of emotional abandonment by a co-star is to strip her of that agency. It replaces her voice with conjecture. Johnson's reflections deserve to be heard as she presents them, not as raw material for a more dramatic storyline. Public perception versus personal truth. The gap between public perception and personal truth is widest in moments of silence, ambiguity, and discomfort. Into that gap, narratives rush. But truth is often quieter, less satisfying, less conclusive. The truth is likely this: Dakota Johnson navigated an overwhelming cultural moment with resilience and complexity. Jamie Dornan navigated the same moment with boundaries and restraint. Neither owes the public an emotional performance to validate the other. And Amelia Warner remained a steady presence, not as a symbol, but as a partner who understood that some storms are survived not by confrontation, but by withdrawal from the noise. 11. Why this narrative persists. The persistence of this narrative reveals more about audience psychology than celebrity behavior. We seek coherence. We want stories with clear causes and effects. We want emotional struggles to have identifiable origins. And when none are provided, we invent them. But human experience resists simplification. Fame is not a relationship problem. It is an environmental one. And no individual within it can be reasonably held responsible for another's internal response to its pressures. 12. Conclusion. Letting complexity exist. Debunking this narrative is not about defending Jamie Dornan as flawless, nor about denying Dakota Johnson's struggles. It is about allowing complexity to exist without forcing it into a moral framework. Not every discomfort has a culprit. Not every silence hides guilt. Not every distance implies damage. Sometimes people simply endure the same storm in different ways. And sometimes the most enduring bonds, like that between Jamie Dornan and Amelia Warner, are forged not in public affirmation, but in shared refusal to let noise define truth. In a culture obsessed with explanation, choosing not to speculate is an act of respect. And perhaps that, more than any narrative, is what this story truly deserves.